Hi, my name is Dr. Katie Mishler and I am a tutor and instructor in the UCD Writing Center. Today's workshop is called Descriptive versus Analytical Writing. To help guide you through the PowerPoint, I have recorded audio to accompany each specific slide. Additionally, I have designed specific exercises to help you practice what we're talking about today. So go ahead, get a piece of paper, and go through the slides at your own pace. To begin with, I would like to go over the objectives for this workshop to give you an idea of what we hope you will learn. Each of these three sections have their own accompanying exercises which allow you to put into practice what you've been learning. The first section is focusing on clarifying the differences between descriptive and analytical writing. The second section will then work with sample text to assess the differences between descriptive and analytical writing. Finally, the third section will give you an opportunity to practice writing analytically. So why is it important for you to learn to identify the differences between descriptive and analytical writing? And also, why is it important for you to learn how to write analytically? Analytical writing is one of the key tenets of academic writing. Academic writing, like any type of writing, has its own specific features and structures. Academic writing is argumentative. This means that it always has a central argument or thesis statement that it is trying to prove through evidence and analysis. It is also structured, focused, and specific. This means that this argument is made logically, also that it is not overly generalized or too broad. Academic writing should also be formal. This means it's different from everyday colloquial speech. Furthermore, you want to make sure that your argument, which is central to your academic writing, is always backed up by evidence. This may take the form of data sets, this may take the form of surveys, it may take the form of outside critical evidence from other scholars in your field. But academic writing also is critical, analytical, and evaluative. You want to make sure that you are engaging with ideas, that you're interpreting data, that you are evaluating different points that different people have made. So we've established that critical writing is central to argumentative and academic writing. Analysis often plays a key role in essay titles as well. So a lot of times students will come into the Writing Center saying that they need help understanding what a specific essay title is asking you to do. And oftentimes these essay titles are asking a student to critically assess, analyze, or evaluate a specific idea, topic, theory, event, or question. Now, even if your essay isn't specifically asking you to critically engage with a specific idea, you are probably already working on analysis, not just in your essays, but also in your in-class discussions and in your in-class lectures as well. So some essay questions that use terms like critically assess, analyze, or evaluate are specifically asking you to write analytically and to think critically about a specific topic. However, if a lot of essay questions, even if they don't contain those keywords, do expect you to perform this type of analytical activity. After this PowerPoint, you will hopefully get a better understanding of what it means to write analytically and to engage with these types of essay questions. So often we also get students who come into the Writing Center and say that they've gotten feedback on an essay, and that feedback says that what they've written is too descriptive and does not contain enough analysis. That's why it's also important for you to understand what is descriptive writing and how to differentiate it from analytical writing. Because what you want to be presenting in your essays is analytical writing. So one thing to think about descriptive writing is that it states facts, it states information without interpreting it. For example, descriptive writing can be characterized as writing which states facts or recounts events without interpreting their significance. It could also give you an overview of a particular topic without engaging with that topic's meaning. Descriptive writing can be said to observe and report the characteristics of a person, place, thing, or phenomenon. So it lists details without explaining why these details matter. Descriptive writing could also explain a theory or an idea. It could be a very complex theory, but if it doesn't actively engage with the theory, interpret the theory, or apply the theory, it isn't fully analytical. Another way to think of this is descriptive writing states the what, the who, or the where. So it states information about a particular topic, or it states particular details about the topic, but it doesn't go any further than that. It doesn't answer the why, the how, or so what. It doesn't interpret these details. It doesn't say why these details actually matter, or how these details relate to the overall argument of an essay. So whereas descriptive writing presents information, analytical writing takes it a step further and interprets information. It states the significance of information. It unpacks information. Another way to think about this is analytical writing is a type of writing which engages with and applies theoretical concepts. So rather than merely stating a theory, it actually applies that theory to a new situation or idea. Analytical writing also evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of ideas instead of simply listing details of particular ideas. It also unpacks the significance of evidence. It doesn't merely state data or state a critical source from a scholar in the field. It interprets the significance of that actual evidence and connects it to an overall argument. Furthermore, analytical writing synthesizes and engages with sources to support and create an argument. So analytical writing is something that takes information from different sources, different people, different critics, different experiments, and it then synthesizes all these different pieces of evidence, and it interprets it, and it analyzes the links between this evidence. It connects this evidence to a new situation or a new argument. Another way to think about this is analytical writing answers the why, the how, and the so what, which the descriptive fails to do so. So it doesn't just list the who, what, and where, which are the details, which is information essentially, but it takes it a step further and it identifies the significance of these details. So I've included this table provided by the University of Bradford. They have an excellent PDF handout that I recommend you take a moment to download because I think you could find it quite helpful in the future. And this table gives you an overview of the differences between descriptive writing and critical analytical writing. So take a few moments and I would read the left side of this table and compare it to the right side of this table and try to identify the differences between these two types of writing. Then on the next slide, I'm going to give you some specific examples of what are the key differences between these two types of writing when applied to actual sentences and actual information. So here is an example of the difference between descriptive versus analytical writing as taken from the previous table. So I took these differences from the table and I applied them to actual sentences and actual information. So for instance, descriptive writing, which is primarily informative, would state what happened in regards to a specific event. So for example, On 1st of September 1939, the German army, under the direction of Adolf Hitler, invaded Poland. This sentence only contains details of what happened. It does not interpret the significance of these events, of these specific places, of the specific people involved. It just states who, what, and where. It doesn't go beyond and say why, or how, or why this matters, why, or so what. Analytical writing, in turn, does contain some of the same details, but it interprets the meaning of these details. So it identifies the significance of events. For example, the German army's invasion of Poland on 1st September 1939 instigated the Second World War, as Adolf Hitler began his ruthless military campaign to invade all of Europe. So it does contain some of the same information. It talks about the German army being involved, Adolf Hitler, the same date, the same event, but it states why this event matters. And it matters because it began the Second World War. So it's interpreting the significance of these specific events rather than merely stating the details of the events. So I've written two more examples, sentences that apply or that demonstrate the differences between these two tables. So descriptive writing would explain what a theory says without showing why this theory matters or applying it to a specific situation. So for instance, in nursing, the theory of cultural competency states that nurses should be aware of their own internalized biases and should approach patients in an open-minded, non-judgmental manner. This sentence basically explains the main core tenets of a particular theory. It doesn't say why it matters. It doesn't apply it to a specific situation. It doesn't show the impact of the theory. This is an example of descriptive writing. However, you can go a step further to make this sentence analytical. And you can do so by demonstrating why something is relevant or suitable, which would be analytical. For example, by practicing cultural awareness, a nurse can foster trust with patients of diverse backgrounds and overcome any communication barriers which may hinder accurate symptom reporting and diagnosis. So this sentence, it does talk about cultural awareness and what that means in terms of nursing and fostering trust with patients. But it shows why it's important, why it's significant. So for instance, that it's important to practice cultural awareness in order to make sure that patients are accurately reporting symptoms and they're accurately diagnosed. So it's showing why this is a relevant theory and how it can be applied. So here's the second half of that table I was mentioning to you that's provided by the University of Bradford. So take just a minute to read over this. Think about the difference between what's in the descriptive writing column and the critical analytical writing column. And then I will show you another example sentence from this table. So this slide shows you two more sentences that I've written which demonstrate and put into action these actual differences between descriptive and analytical writing. So as we've mentioned before, descriptive writing oftentimes provides information without interpreting. It lists details. An example of this is, Impressionism can be defined as a 19th century painting technique which employs many tiny, thin brush strokes to create an overall impression of an object, person, or scene. So by listing details, this gives an overview of some of the defining characteristics of Impressionist painting, but it doesn't explain the significance of this painting technique. However, analytical writing evaluates the relative significance of details rather than just listing the details. For example, the techniques of Impressionist painting, such as the tiny, thin brush strokes used to create an overall impression of an object, person, or scene, represents a radical departure from the 19th century realist school of art, which seeks to create more lifelike images. So in this sentence, it does contain some of that detail. It does define Impressionist painting and things like the tiny thin brush strokes. But it situates it within the history of art in the 19th century and shows why these brushstrokes are so important, what they mean, why they're such a defining feature. Hence why this is a more analytical sentence and would be much stronger in an academic essay. So we have our first exercise, and this is an exercise that is designed to help you practice identifying the difference between analytical and descriptive writing. So please take a moment and read the two following paragraphs, which are about the films Parasite and Coffee, respectively. And I want you to do two different things. And if you haven't gotten a piece of paper and a pen with you yet, it would be a good idea for you to do so at this time. Or you could even bring up a Word document, but make sure you are taking the time to answer these specific questions. I will then give you a sample solution at the end, but I want to make sure that you're taking time to practice. All right, so first, read each paragraph and then try to determine whether each paragraph is analytical or descriptive. After you've determined whether it is analytical or descriptive, I want you to write a few sentences identifying what makes the piece of writing either descriptive or analytical. So take about 5 minutes, the paragraphs are in the slides that follow, and try to identify the differences between each of them. All right, so now that you've taken a moment to have a chance to read over both examples and to identify whether or not they're descriptive or analytical and what it is about them that makes them descriptive or analytical, I'm going to give you a sample solution to each of them. So the first example is a descriptive piece. It is taken from The Guardian, so it is well written and it is quite smart or quite clever. Descriptive writing doesn't necessarily mean bad writing, but it has a very specific purpose. For this purpose, it's a film review from The Guardian about the film Parasite. So I've underlined some specific sentences for you to focus on to demonstrate what it is about making this piece descriptive. I would say that this more talks about the plot or gives an overview of the plot of the film Parasite rather than an in-depth analysis of the film. So for example, it talks about the architecture of the house in the film Parasite, which if you've seen Parasite, you know plays a very central role in it. It talks about how this is a very high-class home that lives, that is placed very high up in comparison to the lower, impoverished slums of Seoul and South Korea. So it gives details about this, but it doesn't explain the significance or analyze the significance of these details. So it demonstrates that there's a class divide between the architectural wonder of the Park family in comparison to the slums, but it doesn't analyze the meaning of that between these two different types of dwellings. I wanted to also point out to the sentence saying, it's a lifestyle that relies upon hired help. So the film Parasite is a critique of capitalism, it is a critique of class divisions, it is a critique of a society in which some people have so much and some have so little. And this one sentence talks about how this family, this upper class family, does rely upon hired help, but it doesn't say what that means or why that's significant specifically to the film. So whereas the previous example was of descriptive writing, this example demonstrates analytical writing. It is also focused on a film called Coffee, but rather than it be taken from a popular news source like The Guardian, it is instead taken from a scholarly journal that focuses on film studies. And this specific example also deals with the idea of class in a film, but it goes a step beyond just giving examples of representations of class and actually analyzes them. So I've underlined a few examples of analysis in this specific piece, both of which are tied to this idea of class bilingualism. So the space that this character occupies in which she is neither belonging to one or another class. But instead of it just saying that she works in a hospital as a nurse, it interprets the significance of her working in a hospital as a nurse. So in that first sentence I have there, it says what her occupation is, but it defines or it analyzes her occupation in relation to this idea of class bilingualism. So this would be an example of analytical writing. Instead of it simply stating key components of the plot, it identifies the significance of these particular moments in the film. So we're moving on to the next section of this workshop. This section, I want you to begin to think about the purposes of writing analytically and the purposes of writing descriptively. Each are used for specific reasons and in specific context. And understanding when one is appropriate and when one should be used can help you understand why, how, and when to use analytical writing. So there are specific purposes and uses of descriptive writing. Although in academic writing, we push you to write analytically, there are sometimes a need to use descriptive writing. And there are reputable sources that might use descriptive writing. So descriptive writing doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad or it's badly written, but descriptive writing has a specific purpose. So you could use descriptive writing to provide context or background information. Descriptive writing is primarily, as I've mentioned before, informative. It provides factual detail. Descriptive writing is also something that we call expository. So it explains something. Some examples of descriptive writing include newspapers, reviews, summaries, like the one we just read on Parasite, synopses, and popular journalism as well. So in each of these forms, the primary objective is to either explain or to inform the audience about something specifically, rather than to go into further analytical depth. So whereas there are specific purpose and uses for descriptive writing, the same holds true for analytical writing. So one of the purposes of analytical writing is to uncover the deeper meaning of specific ideas or evidence. Analytical writing is also used to critically illustrate the connections between diverse ideas or evidence. Academic writing is primarily evaluative. It is used to assess the strengths and weaknesses of a particular issue, a particular theory, a particular idea, or a particular approach. And some examples of analytical writing include academic essays, scholarly articles and monographs, literature reviews, the discussion section of reports, as well as some long-form and investigative journalism. So whereas with descriptive writing, the primary objective is to inform the reader of facts, of background, of context, to explain something, analytical writing tries to uncover the significance of something specifically, to tie together different ideas in order to create a new argument. All right, this is why analytical writing is so foundational to something like academic essays or to scholarly articles or monographs, as well as other forms of academic writing like reports or literature reviews. So for this next exercise, I want you to evaluate descriptive writing. So in the following slide, I've given you a paragraph, and I want you, which is a descriptive paragraph, and I want you to read it. So as you read, I want you to underline examples of descriptive writing from the paragraph. You probably can't underline it actually, so just make a note of examples of descriptive writing from the paragraph. After you've identified these examples of descriptive writing, I want you to, in a few sentences, try to identify the purpose of using descriptive writing in this piece. So in other words, I want you to try to think about what information is being conveyed and how is it being conveyed. Finally, I want you to write in a few sentences what kind of questions could be asked or what kind of information could be provided to make this paragraph more analytical. So another way to think about this question is, I mentioned before that all analytical writing will contain some description, some background context, some facts or information. However, instead of listing that information, it analyzes or unpacks the significance of that information. So I basically want you to look at this paragraph and think, what could be included to make this paragraph analytical instead of making it purely descriptive? So take about, I would say, 3 to 5 minutes max to do the following exercise, and then afterwards I will give you a sample solution for the exercise. Okay, so now that you've had a time to look over this paragraph, I'm going to give you a sample solution to it. So this is taken from the New York Times, so it is from a reputable news source, but it is popular journalism. And the role of popular journalism is often to inform rather than to analyze an issue scientifically. So a lot of times it will be reporting on what happened in an experiment rather than engaging in scientific analysis of its own. So most of this paragraph is descriptive. And again, that doesn't mean it's not well written. It is well written. It is from one of the most famous journalist outlets in the world. But in offering information, it's not really analyzing that information. So I'll give you an example. So it's talking about these white barn owls and these experiments that have done on them. So in the second sentence, which I've highlighted or underlined, it says, once they found that the white owls are better in bright moonlight, they tried some laboratory experiments with stuffed owls and captive voles to look for a reason. The voles froze up to 5 seconds longer when facing a white owl in conditions similar to the light of a bright full moon. There's no difference in freezing time in new moon conditions. So it's presenting information from the study. It's informing the reader about the study and about these different factors which pertain to white barn owls when it comes to moonlight and hunting. However, it's not really offering us analysis. So some questions, and again, these are just sample questions you could ask that could make this more analytical were something like, okay, so there was no difference in freezing times in new moon conditions. What does that mean? Why is that important? What does that suggest about white barn owl hunting patterns? Why is it significant that the voles froze for 5 seconds longer when they saw the light of a full moon? What impact does this have on white barn owls and their ability to breed, on their ability to find food, on their ability to feed their young? Why is this information important? And how can we unpack this information further? What is its significance, in other words? So now that we've taken a moment to evaluate descriptive writing, I want us to do the same thing with analytical writing. So this exercise is written in the same way, however, it is with a piece of analytical writing rather than descriptive writing. So I want you to read the paragraph on the following slide. As you read, be sure to take notes of examples of analytical writing from the paragraph. Then, in a few sentences, try to identify the purpose of using analytical writing in this piece. Try to identify what information is being conveyed and how is it being conveyed. And then finally, in a few sentences, I want you to try to answer what kind of questions does the writer try to answer in order to make this paragraph analytical. So, in comparison to the previous descriptive piece that we saw in exercise 2, whereas that one was almost all description, this one is almost all analysis. To add another level to comparison, the New York Times article was referring to an experiment done by Dr. San Jose and their colleagues on white barn owls and on how moonlight impacts their ability to hunt. So to give you an example of analytical writing, I actually found that original scholarly article published in a scientific journal to demonstrate how the same, I guess you could call it raw data, or the same experiment could be interpreted and written about both descriptively and analytically. So if we look at this example of analytical writing, it's not merely describing the details of the experiment, but it's interpreting those details. It is also perhaps important to note that this is from the discussion section of this scientific article. So an example of analytical writing for this is if we look at maybe the second or third highlighted sentence, which talks about moonlight levels. There's a sentence that reads, moonlight might also influence breeding times because males might indirectly derive oviposition through courtship feeding. Thus, the moon might also determine the onset of reproduction by affecting the number of prey that males of different coloration offer during courtship. Okay, so these sentences are interpreting the findings. They're not merely describing the findings the way the New York Times article is, where it says in this moonlight, the barn owls behaved in this way. It's interpreting it. It's answering the why, the how, and the so what. It is showing us the significance of the findings of this study and interpreting them for us. So it's not merely trying to inform us, the readers, of the information found within the study, but rather it's trying to interpret and tell us the significance or the meaning of the information from that study. Okay, so we're now at the third and final section of the workshop. So in the first section, we worked on identifying the difference between analytical writing and descriptive writing. In the second section, we evaluated those differences and tried to think about when we might want to use descriptive writing and when one might want to use analytical writing. In this final section, we're going to focus on practicing writing analytically. Oftentimes, students will come to the Writing Center and they want help on analysis. Writing descriptively comes more naturally to students. So in this section, we're trying to focus on what steps you can go through in order to make your writing more analytical. So this slide gives you some ways that can help you integrate analytical writing into your work. So the first thing is to make sure that you're evaluating the evidence. You're not just stating it the way that the New York Times article that we looked at is stating it or providing information on it. You want to make that you're evaluating what the evidence you're providing means. You also want to make sure that you're fully unpacking the meaning of different terms, ideas, and definitions that you may use. You don't want to merely use the word neoliberalism without demonstrating to the reader that you understand the meaning of neoliberalism and also how you are defining it specifically in relation to your argument. Another step is to make sure that you're synthesizing secondary material into your overall argument. So again, you're not just stating what the material says. You're demonstrating explicitly how that material relates back to the points you're trying to make, back to the argument specifically. You can also think of this as you're demonstrating the connections between secondary material to your ideas, to your overall argument, and also to other points of secondary material. Another thing you can do is to make sure that you're evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of other arguments, studies, or methodologies. You don't want to just say Sigmund Freud stated that the subconsciousness is divided into the ego, the id, and the superego, okay? You want to evaluate whether that is relevant to the argument, whether there are any detractions to this specific argument, if there's anything that you should be hesitant about applying, if this is perhaps an outdated mode of psychology and analysis, if perhaps, Sigmund Freud, for instance, has been criticized for being misogynistic. These are things you want to consider when you're evaluating other studies or other arguments that people have made. You don't just want to state what they've said without evaluating why something is strong or why something is valid or why an idea maybe has limitations to it. And finally, you want to make sure you're engaging with theory and applying it to your argument. So you're not just stating what a theory is, but you're taking that theory and you're applying it to a new specific situation, or you're demonstrating how that theory connects back to your actual argument. I'd also say when it comes to something like theory, you also want to make sure you're evaluating that theory and the strengths and weaknesses of it as well. So if you're struggling with analytical writing, it might also be helpful for you to ask yourself the following questions. So a lot of times in the Writing Center, students will come to us and they'll show us their work. And a lot of times they have the foundation or maybe the scaffolding of an academic essay there where they're listing evidence. And a lot of times then we tell them that they need to go back and they need to interpret that evidence. They need to analyze that evidence. Sometimes they have points listed that they haven't fully connected back to their central argument, or maybe they haven't made connections between specific ideas in which they should be analyzing how these ideas relate to one another, okay? So sometimes it can be helpful for you to look at what you've written thus far and then go back to it and say, okay, have I done this? Have I applied these have I answered these questions fully? So if you apply these questions to your work, it can be quite helpful, all right? So you might want to ask yourself, what does this evidence mean? So again, you're not just stating the evidence, but you're asking and you're trying to answer the question, what is its significance? Another question, how does this point relate back to my central argument? So you want to make sure that in analytical writing that you're not just stating a point, but you're demonstrating, you're analyzing it, and you're connecting it back to the main point you're trying to make. Similarly, what is the connection between these different ideas? So descriptive writing might just list ideas. Analytical writing uncovers the connections and explicitly states the links between different ideas. Another question would be, what does this theory or methodology reveal about this particular topic? So you want to make sure, again, that you're applying the theory or applying the methodology, and you're using that theory as an analytical lens to interpret a particular topic or idea or question. Finally, you might want to ask yourself, what is the relevance of this evidence or this point, and how can I link it to my main thesis statement? So analytical writing unpacks the relevance or significance of particular evidence or ideas. So always make sure you're demonstrating you understand the relevance of the points that you're making or of the evidence that you're including. Also, again, since this is argumentative writing, or academic writing is argumentative writing, you want to make sure that you're demonstrating how particular evidence is relevant to your main thesis statement. So for our fourth and final exercise, I want you to practice analytical writing. All right, so I want you to imagine that you are writing the final essay, which reads, "Analyze the effectiveness of social distancing in decreasing the spread of COVID-19." So I want you to take maybe 5 minutes and practice your analytical writing skills by writing a paragraph in response to this topic. Remember, since this is analytical writing, you want to focus on the why, the how, or the so what when unpacking the significance and meaning of social distancing. You don't want to merely define social distancing, but you rather want to interpret it and its effectiveness in decreasing the spread of the coronavirus. As a note, you may want to start with a couple of descriptive sentences defining social distancing in order to provide context and a foundation for your sample paragraph. But I want to make sure that you are also analyzing and critically engaging with the information provided in these sentences. So take about 5 minutes to complete this exercise, and then after this I will have some sample solutions which you can look at to give you an idea of how one could answer this question by writing analytically. Okay, so now that you've taken a few minutes to practice your analytical writing skills, I'm going to give you a number of sample solutions for how you could answer this question. There is no right or wrong answer to this question, as it is a mock essay question. But there are ways that you could answer it which are more descriptive, and there are ways that you could answer it which are more analytical. So this first example is purely descriptive, okay? It doesn't contain analysis, it just presents information, details, and facts. It states that COVID-19 is highly transmittable. It talks about what are the HSE's social distancing guidelines, and then it also talks about how this social distancing, what it looks like essentially when it comes to things like public spaces like shops, and how it relates to how people are working as well. And it ends by stating that these are examples of social distancing measures. So it basically gives you an informative overview of examples of social distancing, but it doesn't tell you what is the impact of these measures. And if you look back at the question reads, "Analyze the effectiveness of social distancing in decreasing the spread of COVID-19." So this essay does not, or this sample response does not fulfill the requirements of the essay because it isn't analyzing the effectiveness of these measures. It's merely stating these measures. Now, this could be a good way for you to start an essay by demonstrating that you understand what are the social distancing measures in place, but you want to make sure that you're analyzing them. You're demonstrating what impact these measures are having on public health in Ireland. Okay, so this sample solution is much stronger than the previous solution because it gives us examples of analytical writing, and it also demonstrates some of the effectiveness of social distancing measures. So I've contained this, I've included the same sentences from the descriptive example, but I've added sentences which analyze the significance or the meaning of the description. So I've underlined these sentences to help you differentiate between them. So whereas the descriptive example simply stated what the HSE was recommending people do, it then has examples of analytical writing which engage with or interpret the significance of these measures. So it says why these measures are important, what they are attempting to accomplish through these measures. All right, it's same with the second sentence, or the final two sentences, which again talk about the fact that individual realtors are, ensuring that there are less people in the shops, that there's non-essential businesses are now closed, and that people are working from home. That's purely informative. This example follows that up with analytical writing that interprets that evidence. So it states why these measures are being in place. What is the reason that these are being implemented, and how this will hopefully impact and slows transmission of COVID-19. So instead of just, again, stating information about social distancing, it's interpreting that information, okay? It's showing why it's significant, why it's important, why this needs to be done. So it's not just listing the information, it's taking it a step further and engaging with it analytically and critically as well. Okay, so just to wrap up and to give an overview of the main points from this workshop, it's important to remember the differences between descriptive and analytical writing. So descriptive writing is expository or explanatory and informative, whereas analytical writing is evaluative and critical. Descriptive writing states information, so it states who, what, and where. Analytical writing, however, goes deeper, and it demonstrates the why, how, and so what. So it demonstrates the significance or the meaning or the importance of particular ideas. It's also important for you to remember that there are different uses for analytical and descriptive writing, okay? Descriptive writing doesn't always have to be considered bad writing. A lot of good writing is descriptive writing. However, for something like academic writing or scientific writing, writing that you see in journals, in your essays, in scholarly monographs, that needs to be analytical writing. And in that, just to remind you that academic writing is primarily analytical. So your essay titles and questions are often designed to encourage this type of critical engagement. So even if you do have an essay title that isn't asking you directly or explicitly to critically analyze or critically assess, a lot of times they are designed to prompt you to engage in this type of critical activity. So I want to take a moment to thank each of you for taking the time to participate in this workshop. We're here to help, and I really hope that you found this helpful. So thank you guys again for taking the time to listen to this workshop. I hope you found it helpful. If you have more questions about analytical writing or any other questions about academic writing or essay writing, please do make an appointment with UCD Writing Center. We're no longer active for in-person appointments in the library, obviously. However, we are still offering one-on-one virtual online appointments 5 days a week. So for more information about making an appointment with us, please visit our website or please email us. We're still here, we're still happy to help you, and I really, really encourage you to make an appointment if you have any questions about analytical writing or anything else about anything you're working on at the moment.